Do you recognize him?
No, who is he?
The man I loved. Did you kill him?
It was either him or me. The answer to the question is yes, I did kill him.
Then, when this mission is over, I will kill you.
Commander, this tracing means that the Russians can track our nuclear submarines underwater and sink them.
But how could they track them? It's impossible.
It's quite simple, really. Someone can now locate a submerged nuclear submarine by its wake. In fact, she's right behind us.
That means they can totally undermine our Western defense strategy.
Where, in fact, did we get the tracing, Freddie?
Cara, diplomatic bag. Somebody got hold of the plans of that tracking system and is trying to sell them.
Who is putting the submarine tracking system on the market?
You must first make contact with a man called Fekesh.
Our respective governments have agreed to pool their resources to find out what happened to our submarines.
We have entered a new era of Anglo-Soviet cooperation.
And I believe you're familiar with Major Amazova.
That is the symbol of the Stromberg shipping line.
Carl Stromberg? But he's one of the richest men in the world.
One of the principal capitalist exploiters of the West, sir.
Jaws, I'm assigning you the task of recovering the microfilm copy of the tracking system.
Stromberg has a marine research laboratory. On Corsica, I believe.
An underwater city. Fascinating, isn't it? The only hope for the future of mankind.
We all have our dreams.
Soon a reality. I intend to change the face of history.
By destroying the world?
By creating a world. A new and beautiful world beneath the sea. New York and Moscow will cease to exist. A new era will begin.
The Spy Who Loved Me exploded onto the big screen in the UK on the 8th of July in 1977. It would hit US cinemas a week later, produced on a budget of $13 million, which is about $68 million in today's money, directed by Lewis Gilbert, who previously worked on You Only Live Twice, and would go on to direct Moonraker. The Spy Who Loved Me would earn $185 million worldwide, making it the most successful Bond film to date, and earned itself 3 Academy Award nominations, one for art direction, original score and song, but lost out on all of them. Production designer Ken Adam later reflected that although the Bond films were successful, to some extent the Motion Picture Academy thought the Bond films were rather contrived. Despite its success, the critics were mixed on the movie, which was not uncommon as this was now the 10th movie in the franchise. Many critics were getting tired of the Bond formula. Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune praised a ski jump stunt in which he wrote that you begin to think Spy may turn out to be as good as From Russia with Love, the best Bond of all, no such luck. The opening pace of Spy is impossible to sustain, but the rest of the picture is merely good, not great. He also found Stromberg to be less memorable than previous Bond villains, even noting that Jaws is far more entertaining than his master. The New York Times said the film was formulaic and half an hour too long. Variety remarked the film is unoriginal and mild on suspense, when the gimmick-laden action is bountiful and eye-ravishing, and will compensate most audiences. Newsweek wrote after the opening sequence, much of the action in The Spy Who Loved Me is somewhat downhill, but the film, shot in 7 countries, is so rich in fantasy, so filled with beautiful scenery, gorgeous women, preposterous villains and impossible situations, that it's easier to suspend disbelief entirely and escape inside the gadgetry and glamour. Audiences didn't care what the critics thought, as it went on to be one of the most popular films in the long-running franchise. Years later, Steve Coogan as Alan Partridge would act out the opening and title sequence.
Stop getting Bond wrong! I'll tell you about The Spy Who Loved Me. All do that with your fingers round your eye. I'm Roger Moore. Bang!
Roger Moore would later admit that this was his favourite Bond film, along with director Christopher Nolan, and second unit director and editor of the film John Glenn who went on to direct 5 Bond films, would say in the late 90s it was the best 007 film of all time. In 1974, The Man with the Golden Gun hadn't gone down well with critics and fans of James Bond. It did alright financially, but it was seen as a disappointment for the producers, and something was needed to boost the franchise and give their new 007, Roger Moore, a film that would define his legacy as the famous character. The Spy Who Loved Me was announced as the next Bond film. Cubby Broccoli said at the time the title always interested him. Broccoli's holding company, Danjaq, which is responsible for the copyright and trademarks related to James Bond on screen, had to agree to not use the novel in any other form. The book was published in April of 1962. It was an experiment by Fleming to try to capture a female readership for Bond. The book is structured in 3 parts: me, them and him. It is a nightmare biography of the fictional Vivian Michelle, whose voice Fleming writes in the first person. Fleming's experiment was deemed to not have been a success, and he initially barred all reprints and paperback editions. Fleming stipulated that no film should be made from the book. Fleming's name was moved for the first time above the film's title to above James Bond 007. His name reverted to the traditional location for Moonraker, the last Eon film based on Fleming's novel before 2006's Casino Royale. Since the screenplay for the film had nothing to do with Fleming's original novel, Eon Productions for the first time authorised a novelisation based on the script. If you want to know more about Fleming's original book and the novelisation, I would highly recommend the videos by 007 superfan Calvin Dyson. Before they could move forward with the production, there were still ongoing problems with co-producer Harry Saltzman and his financial situation. Things were getting out of control and tensions between him and fellow producer Albert R. Broccoli had gotten worse. During the making of The Man with the Golden Gun, Broccoli and Saltzman hated each other, and they knew this would be the last time they would work together. Harry had made many poor investments over the years, in particular investing heavily in Technicolor. He wasn't paying his debts, the banks were getting frustrated and chasing him down for their money, which he would ignore at every opportunity. His son would later say his father was out of his depth with dealing with the bankers. Things got worse as Harry's wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, adding further stress to his mountain of problems. Under Danjaq's distribution agreement with United Artists, it was required they produce a Bond adaptation every 18 months, or run the risk of losing the rights to the series to United Artists, and they would enlist another production company. Despite a new Bond film being announced, Saltzman continued blocking production and refused to allow Broccoli to buy his shares, but Saltzman was getting desperate, and he would finally agree to sell his shares directly to United Artists for £20 million. So that another Bond film could go forward in 1975 and to clear his debts. With Guy Hamilton set to direct, Broccoli commissioned a number of writers to work on the script, including comic book writer Cary Bates, young filmmaker John Landis and even Jerry Anderson, who in the late 60s had provided a treatment early on when they were going to do Moonraker. Some of his ideas would wind up in the Spy Who Loved Me script. At the time, Anderson wrote an original 70-page treatment with regular collaborator Anthony Barwick. Jerry Anderson declined the fee as he desperately wanted to produce this Bond picture himself. Nothing ultimately came out of it, and Broccoli and Saltzman proceeded to make Diamonds Are Forever and Live and Let Die. When he heard of The Spy Who Loved Me and its story outline, Anderson started legal proceedings against Broccoli for plagiarism of story elements, but withdrew shortly afterwards and relinquished the treatment and received £3,000 in compensation. A United Artists executive suggested John Landis as a writer. After meeting Broccoli at his home in Beverly Hills, Landis was sent to London. He recalled, "I was given a beautiful apartment, a 16mm projector, and all the James Bond films up to that point." Landis said, "I wrote a lot of stuff, but never a screenplay. We never worked out the whole story. Our villain was Blofeld, we had an underwater base and underwater vehicles, as well as a super tanker that captured submarines and could sink to the bottom of the ocean at any time." Eventually, Richard Maybaum provided the initial draft, trying to incorporate ideas from all the other writers into his script. Maybaum's script featured an alliance of international terrorists, with Spectre and Blofeld returning to the series, but Cubby Broccoli's arch-nemesis Kevin McClory had learned of Broccoli's plans to use Spectre, an organisation that had first been created by Fleming while working with McClory and Jack Whittingham on Thunderball, before it was a novel in the late 50s. McClory filed an injunction against Eon Productions, alleging copyright infringement. Guy Hamilton by this point had bowed out, after having worked on the numerous scripts, and wanted to stretch his wings. He took the job to direct Superman for Alexander Solkind, but after many months on Superman and getting nowhere with the project, the Solkinds wanted to move to the UK to save money. And Guy couldn't go as he was a tax exile, and he was replaced by Richard Donner, who went on to make it one of the biggest hits of the 1970s. 007 producers would then hire Lewis Gilbert, who they had worked with before on You Only Live Twice. But Lewis wasn't happy with the current script and felt it needed more work and wished to change the tone, so he brought in writer Christopher Wood. Gilbert felt the previous Roger Moore films were doing it wrong, which was writing Bond like how Sean Connery played him, and wanted Bond closer to the books, very English, very smooth, good sense of humour. Not wishing to extend the already ongoing legal dispute, Broccoli requested Wood remove all references to Blofeld and Spectre, and focus on the Russians and the KGB. Roger Moore bonded quickly with Lewis Gilbert. Moore compared his 007 directors. Guy was more serious about Bond, whereas Lewis would say, "Come on dear, it's a bit of fun." The fun was enhanced by a last-minute script polished by Tom Mankiewicz, who recalled, "I rewrote The Spy Who Loved Me at Cubby's house for no credit, because they had already given out the credits. Cubby paid me cash under the table to rewrite the picture." Tom claimed a lot of the dialogue is mine, and recalled Moore reportedly asked Broccoli, "When did Mankiewicz get on this picture?" Cubby said, "He's not on the picture, Roger." He said, "Of course he is. He's on every effing page." Mankiewicz also had fun with his own name, christening the doctor killed by Stromberg at the beginning of the film Professor Markovitz. For the cast, we have the regular players returning with M, Q, Moneypenny, and of course 007. For the new cast members, we have Barbara Bach, a former model, plays Anya Amasova, a Soviet KGB agent known as XXX. Barbara was cast only 4 days before principal photography began, and performed her audition expecting just a supporting role in the film. Barbara would marry Ringo Starr in 1981, and appeared in a few more roles, but would stop acting by 1986. In 1983, she remarked that Bond is a chauvinist pig who uses girls to shield him against bullets. Actor of stage and screen Kurt Jürgens plays Karl Stromberg, who plans to trigger World War III and destroy the world, then create a new civilization underwater. Kurt's casting was a suggestion of director Lewis Gilbert, who had worked with him before. Kurt would sadly pass away in 1982. Richard Kiel, often referred to as the Gentle Giant, plays Jaws, Stromberg's seemingly indestructible henchman with a set of metal teeth. Before the casting of Richard Kiel, Will Sampson, David Prowse and Jack O'Halloran were considered to play Jaws. The James Bond film producers spotted Kiel in Barbary Coast and thought he was ideal for the role. He was often shot in the movie with his mouth closed or briefly showing his metal teeth, as he admitted the mouthpiece was extremely painful to wear and could only be used for a few minutes on every take. An interesting fact is that Stanley Kubrick's daughter, Katharina, would design the teeth. Due to his popularity, he would return in Moonraker. Caroline Monroe, star of Hammer Horror, plays Naomi, Stromberg's personal assistant and a would-be assassin. Monroe's casting was inspired by an advertisement campaign she had made. Monroe's career would continue to blossom during the 80s, appearing in more horror films, had a career in the music industry, and even appeared on many UK TV shows. Shane Rimmer plays Commander Carter, commanding officer of the USS Wayne. Shane was an American actor working in the UK. He voiced Scott Tracy in Thunderbirds and had minor roles in Superman 2 and 3 and even Batman Begins. Jeffrey Keane plays Sir Frederick Grey, the Minister of Defence. Keane would reprise his role in 5 more Bond films. Walter Gotell plays General Gogol, the head of the KGB. Walter previously played Mozenzi in From Russia with Love, and he would reprise this role for 5 more Bond films. Michael Billington plays Sergei, a Soviet agent and Anya's lover. Michael had previously screen tested for the role of Bond. He did a photo shoot for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but failed to get the part and tried again for Live and Let Die, and when Moore was out of his contract and hired per film, he tested for Moonraker and Octopussy. And we have Robert Brown as Admiral Hargreaves, a British Royal Navy official. Brown would later play as M from Octopussy to Licence to Kill, as Bernard Lee would pass away in 1981. Like many of the Bond films, they would be shot in various locations around the world, but the majority of the interior sequences and big sets would be filmed at Pinewood Studios. During the film's production, the BBC were allowed on set to film a series of episodes for Open University called Mass Communication and Society to educate students on filmmaking. Some of this footage would find itself on the various special features over the years on DVD and Blu-ray, but the full 3 hours can be found on YouTube, though not in great quality. For the script, it required the use of a super tanker, and there was no studio big enough to house the interior, so set designer Ken Adam was given the opportunity to build a new soundstage at Pinewood that would be named the 007 stage at a cost of $1.8 million. When it came time to using the soundstage, the cinematographer Claude Renoir struggled to light it as it was so huge and his eyesight was failing. Ken Adam recognised the crew needed help and reached out to Stanley Kubrick for assistance. The two had previously vowed to never work with each other again after filming Barry Lyndon. As Adam was apprehensive about bringing someone as argumentative as Kubrick on the set of a Bond film, he recognised that the practical lighting used in Barry Lyndon indicated Kubrick could find a solution. Kubrick attended the set for 3 to 4 hours to provide insights on how to light the final set piece. While his involvement was kept a secret, it arguably saved the film from going over budget and delaying the shooting schedule. The main unit began filming in August of 1976. The then head of public relations at Lotus Cars heard that Eon was shopping for a new Bond car. In efforts to get Eon's attention, they parked a prototype outside their offices at Pinewood. Eon was impressed and asked Lotus to borrow the prototypes for filming. While filming the cars between shoots, Lotus test driver Roger Becker impressed the crew with his handling of the car that for the rest of filming in Sardinia, Becker became the stunt driver. In October, the second unit travelled to the Bahamas to film the underwater sequences. To create the illusion of the car becoming a submarine, visual effects expert Derek Meddings handled its transformation. The scene of Bond skiing off the mountain was inspired by a Canadian Club whisky advertisement in Playboy magazine of Rick Sylvester performing a stunt which caught the attention of producer Michael G. Wilson. They wanted to replicate this photo but in live action for Bond's dramatic introduction. The stunt would cost $500,000, the most expensive single movie stunt at the time. Bond film veteran Willie Bogner filmed the skiing, and Alan Hume would film Sylvester jumping off the mountain, earning himself $30,000 for the stunt. Cubby Broccoli had planned for Bond to return in For Your Eyes Only, but he saw the impact of Star Wars that year and decided to film Moonraker instead to take advantage of the space opera theme, as Bond would find himself going into outer space. For the film's plot, 007 is tasked with investigating the disappearance of British and Soviet ballistic missile submarines that have vanished without trace, but before he does, he has to escape from Austria as the KGB are after him. Bond's superiors reveal plans for the highly advanced submarine tracking system are being offered in Egypt, which could help in locating their missing subs. In Egypt, 007 encounters KGB agent XXX, who was also on the same mission to locate the microfilm, which details the plans. Industrialist Carl Stromberg wants the stolen plans of the tracking system returned and sends out Jaws to retrieve them, and orders him to kill anyone who gets in his way. Bond meets the seller of the microfilm, but he is killed by Jaws before he could secure it. Jaws escapes in a van and Bond and Anya hide inside. They track him down and Bond battles with him. They manage to narrowly escape with the microfilm and travel across Egypt together. They reluctantly join forces after a truce is made by their superiors. Upon closer inspection of the microfilm, they uncover evidence linking the plans to Stromberg. While travelling by train to Stromberg's base in Sardinia, Jaws returns and battles with Bond. James manages to boot him off the train. Posing as a marine biologist and his wife, Bond and Anya visit Stromberg's base and discover that he had launched a mysterious new supertanker 9 months earlier, and they later find out it has never visited any port or harbour. As they leave the base and get back on land, they head off in Bond's new car, which has the ability to go underwater, and they get attacked on orders by Stromberg. As they escape underwater, they examine Stromberg's Atlantis base. The pair confirms that he is operating the submarine tracking system. Back on land, Anya discovers that Bond killed her lover Sergei while he was in Austria, and she vows to kill Bond as soon as their mission is complete. The Spy Who Loved Me would make use of matte paintings and optical effects for parts of Egypt and Stromberg's underwater base. The majority of the FX work was handled by the legendary Derek Meddings, who was a master of shooting miniatures and blowing things up. His work on Jerry Anderson's TV shows such as Thunderbirds and Stingray showcased his incredible talents. Derek had a number of miniatures to shoot featuring Atlantis, Stromberg's headquarters, the supertanker, the underwater action of Bond's new car, and additional stunt work. Atlantis was filmed in the summer heat of the Bahamas. The gigantic model was constructed in England before being shipped to the location for filming. It stood over 8 feet tall and had to be manoeuvred using cranes. Whilst in the Bahamas, Derek also filmed the shots for the supertanker, all of which were originally intended to be made using a colossal shell tanker that was offered for free to the production. However, Eon quickly discovered that the insurance costs for the crew and hire of the tanker would cost £40,000 per day. So Derek was told to build the entire tanker as a miniature. The model was gigantic, 60 feet long and weighed 20 tons when they fully assembled it. Derek's design for the model only allowed for the last quarter of the boat to be able to float. The rest had to be built like a catamaran to allow the hull doors to open and swallow the submarines. Different Lotus models were used to show the car making its underwater transformation. The car entered the water was purely a shell propelled off the jetty by compression air cannons. Once underwater, additional full-size models were used as the vehicle fired depth charges and smoke screens. 6 Lotus cars were used in total. For the many films Derek Meddings worked on, his miniature work was always pretty spectacular. You do get the odd shot that may give its scale away, but most of the time it's very seamless in creating the illusion that it's full scale. The best work in the film is the destruction of Atlantis and the supertanker. Nothing is more fun than seeing a miniature explode. CGI just can't compete. Derek would get the recognition he deserved the following year, winning an Academy Award and a BAFTA for his work on Superman the movie. Oscar-winning composer Marvin Hamlish would take over duties providing the score, as John Barry couldn't work in the UK at the time for tax reasons, very much like Guy Hamilton. Marvin had admitted that popular 70s group The Bee Gees were the main inspiration for his score, and it would feature far more electronic sounds and synthesizers than any previous 007 soundtrack. Several pieces of classical music were also included into the score. Stromberg plays Bach's Air on the G string.
Bit of bush.
Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21 as his hideout Atlantis rises from the sea. The score also includes 2 pieces of popular film music scored by Maurice Jarre, the Dr. Zhivago theme, which is played on Anya's music box during the pre-credit sequence, and the theme from Lawrence of Arabia, which appears during a desert sequence, naturally. The theme song Nobody Does It Better was composed by Marvin, written by Carol Sager, and performed by Carly Simon. It was the first theme song in the series with a different title to that of the film, although the title is in the lyrics. It was nominated for the Best Song Oscar, but lost to You Light Up My Life. The Spy Who Loved Me became the first Bond score to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Score, whilst John Barry shockingly had never been nominated for his previous Bond scores. A large percentage of the music in the film was re-recorded for the soundtrack album, and does not sound exactly like the music in the film. This wasn't uncommon at the time, as the Omen 2 score would be re-recorded for the LP to save money, to get around the unions. The track Bond 77 was changed. What's on the album is a new arrangement and adds more jazz to the piece. The main song also differs in the film. It has a fade out on the album/single, but in the film's opening titles, it has a more abrupt ending, finishing with a long electronic note. The track Anya on the album does not feature in the film. Large chunks of the score never made their way to a soundtrack release, which is really frustrating. I love the score to the film, but what made it to the album, I'm only interested in a couple of tracks, and the others seem like odd choices or just like filler. Nobody Does It Better is an amazing song and one of the best for the franchise, but outside of that I tend to listen to Bond 77, the electronic guitar section is amazing, and Ride to Atlantis, which is so super chilled. The others, however, I'm not really fussed about, making for a pretty weak album, which is mental as the score got an Oscar nomination and the majority of it is not available. I'm just hoping one day they will eventually release the full score to the film so I can fully appreciate it. 13 years after the film came out, a video game arrived in 1990 for the then popular home computers, the Amiga, Atari ST, ZX Spectrum, Amstrad and Commodore 64. At this point Timothy Dalton was James Bond, so the artwork wouldn't feature the likeness of him or Roger, though Roger's name is listed in the credits. The game would only be associated by the title and the events in the film. Domark had acquired the rights to produce games on the films and put out 6 titles from 1985 to 1993, and this will be the 5th title. Stages 1 and 2 are a mix of Bond driving the famous Lotus car on ground and under the ocean, plus you get to use a speedboat. Stage 3 you have to protect Bond as he sits on the bomb as it travels along the track above the submarine. Stage 4 is a puzzle where you have to get the right launch codes. Stage 5 has Bond on a ski boat as he heads to Stromberg's base, and the final stage, which is similar to Stage 3, you have to shoot the various bad guys and Jaws pops up now and again, and we see Stromberg holding Anya hostage, and it appears the artist on the game went a bit over the top with the size of her boobs. Very much like Ocean Software and their licensed video games, Domark would do the same with a mix of different types of gameplay. The game on release got pretty good reviews, with most awarding it around 75%, with most proclaiming it was a competent movie license. There was quite a lot to enjoy, though some thought it was uninspiring. I only played this briefly as a kid on the Commodore 64. The title sequence alone always made me laugh, with Bond pulling this bizarre pose, looking like his spine was completely out of whack. I thought it was alright, but I didn't get far into it. I tried the Atari ST version recently, which was a major upgrade in graphics, but I didn't get that far as it was too hard, so I had to cheat. The composer Matt Furniss does this bizarre funky remix of the Bond theme, which is surprisingly catchy, though it does sound like a B-side produced by Timmy Mallet. The standout piece of the game is the artwork for the ending screen, which is hilariously bad, with Bond looking like some grey-haired middle-aged man. Well, he is middle-aged, but that ain't Bond. If you don't mind frustrating games, and if you are a hardcore Bond fan, then give it a go, but there are far better games out there, especially a recent mod of GoldenEye 64, so you can now play The Spy Who Loved Me with the GoldenEye engine. Yeah, play that instead. The Spy Who Loved Me is considered by many of the fans as the best of Roger Moore's outings as 007, and some even consider it the best film of the franchise. Though it was criticised for being too formulaic at the time, it does certainly fall back on what worked in the past. Goldfinger set the standard on what a Bond film should have to please the public. The Spy Who Loved Me features a villain who wants to destroy the world to fit his own ideals. He has an outlandish base of operations. It features a memorable henchman in the form of Jaws. Bond fights him on a train, a classic trait of the series. Bond has a flashy car that has new gadgets. We have an unforgettable opening act, a fantastic song, a sexy love interest who has a stake in the plot and not just someone Bond throws aside after a quick shag. The film hits all the right spots, but despite falling on what we have seen before, it does have a freshness to it. I don't ever recall watching it and thinking, I've seen this all before, or found myself wishing it was different. It manages to find its stride from the offset and keeps up the action, humour and sense of adventure to the end. I was born 5 years after the film hit cinemas. I, like most fans, grew up with Bond on television. And with so many films in the series by the mid to late 80s, there was always a Bond film on television over the holidays or just random weekends. Every generation has their Bond. My dad grew up with Sean Connery, and he will argue with you until he's red in the face that Sean is Bond, but for me it was Roger Moore. And A Spy Loved Me Like Live and Let Die was repeated so many times on television, so I grew up very accustomed to Moore and his portrayal of the character, and quite frankly the action was getting more outlandish and the title songs became more catchy, so as a kid that was very appealing to me. As I got older, I certainly appreciated the Connery films, and really enjoyed and respected From Russia With Love and Goldfinger like all the Bond fans, and the more serious tone I craved, hence my appreciation for Dalton as 007, and the campy Roger Moore films less so, but The Spy Who Loved Me just had that perfect balance. If you are very familiar with Roger's outing as Bond, the first two films didn't really exploit Roger's strength as an actor. The writers were basically getting him to do a similar performance to Connery, which Lewis Gilbert wanted to change, as he knew Roger had a wicked sense of humour and charm to him that would elevate these new Bond adventures. So from the get-go we are seeing a lighter performance of Roger as the secret agent. He strikes the right tone when it comes to the serious moments, but once he encounters the ladies the charm is laid on thick, and his comedic talents shine through. Now it doesn't get silly and over the top. The later films such as Moonraker and Octopussy would get a bit out of hand with the level of cheese and comedy that may have seemed right at the time, but in retrospect come across as a bit goofy and dated, and out of place in a James Bond film, hence why the future films would strike a more serious tone. As with a number of the older Bond films, they do tend to have some pacing issues. With Bond's globe-trotting, it can become this tour guide of the locations as we see Bond wandering around in some jazzy flares, taking in the sights. This was also common in the Connery films, as most people hadn't travelled to another country. The filmmakers would give the public a chance to soak in the sights, which through modern eyes does give it a sluggish pace. The scenes set around Egypt do have this problem, and some quick trims here and there would have benefited, as the film doesn't need to be over 2 hours long. You can easily cut about 10 to 12 minutes out of it, and it wouldn't affect the story. As with many James Bond films, if someone quizzed you on what happens in the film, you would struggle to remember, even if you had watched it a dozen times. You tend to remember the set pieces or action scenes, the villain, the gadgets Bond uses that will link it to the film, as the key element to kickstart the plot is often a MacGuffin that's just utilised for Bond to hop off on his mission. You often forget halfway through why Bond has gone out on his mission in the first place, but you just get wrapped up in the action. I think if you ask most people what the plot was for the old school Bond films, they probably can't tell you, but they will remember those action scenes, the car and music, that's for sure. Karl Stromberg is a really interesting villain that is never fully developed. We don't really get to know much about him outside of his plans to trigger World War III and build his utopia under the sea. There is little backstory, and the reveal of his webbed hands gives some mystery and intrigue to him. Can he breathe underwater? Which the filmmakers could be suggesting as he has mutated, but nothing is exploited, which really annoyed me as a kid, and still to this day. I want to know more about his webbed hands, goddammit! The final face-off between Bond and him is awesome. The gun with a massive barrel under the table causing an explosion once fired, which did hurt Roger Moore, it's all there in camera. Brilliant moment and one of my favourites. Barbara Buck has the looks, but throughout she is pretty wooden, and her performance is bordering on lifeless. Maybe it's done on purpose, as she is a KGB agent and trying to maintain a serious approach throughout. You get a sense of relief when she cracks a smile. Her character does have an interesting arc, as she realises Bond killed her lover, but that tension is rarely dealt with, and she gets over him pretty quickly, as Bond is too charming to resist. I think they could have played with that heartache a bit more and had more friction between them, but I understand that may have messed with the lighter tone director Lewis Gilbert was trying to achieve, and you want to maintain a sense of fun for the audience and not get bogged down in too much drama. With the previous two Bond films getting shot with the Academy ratio, with Lewis Gilbert behind the camera, Bond returns to the big CinemaScope format, giving the picture an epic scale that works wonders for the supertanker and the battle inside for the finale. The film certainly delivers on the action front. The opening act is fast-paced and exciting, though it always makes me chuckle when it cuts back to Roger, who wasn't there for the shoot and is back at Pinewood in front of a projected backdrop. The car chase and underwater sequences deliver the goods. It was just thrilling to watch as a kid, and it still works to this day. It's so inventive and creative. Plus there's plenty of explosions at the end, accompanied with shots of Roger Moore constantly blinking as he fires his gun. Lovely stuff. There is just something comforting watching The Spy Who Loved Me. It just reminds me of the times when the whole family would watch a Bond film at Christmas, and one my dad enjoyed outside of the Sean Connery classics. I think the film managed to take all the best elements from the previous entries and wrapped it up in a neat package. Yes, it has a couple of problems I have with it personally, but it's never stopped me from going back to it time and time again. This is Roger Moore at his finest as 007. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to click the like button and hit the bell to be notified of my latest reviews. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain access to exclusive videos and take part in Q&As, follow the link below.